All right, picture this. It's late, you've got a massive mug of coffee in hand, and you are an aspiring CFO pulling a late-night study session. Your goal? To absolutely master corporate governance for your final certification exam. Well, consider us your personal study buddies today. We're going to break down the essential structures, look at some pretty dramatic corporate failures, and most importantly, we're going to thoroughly reinforce that crucial English vocabulary you need to master the global language of the boardroom. So let's get you that passing grade, shall we?
Here's our game plan for this session. We've got the CFO's study guide, structuring the board, the power of NEDs, crucial board committees, and finally, the rules of remuneration. Okay, let's dive into this.
So I want you to think of this as your mastermind map for corporate governance. It brilliantly shows how this entire ecosystem fits together. At the very top, you've got the board itself, right? Which then splits into specific structures and types of directors, namely your executives and your non-executives. And from there, you can see how it flows down into specialized board committees and all the way over into the critical realm of how we actually pay those directors. Honestly, whenever you feel a bit lost in the terminology today, just picture this map in your head. Everything connects back to this central hierarchy of leadership.
Right, let's jump straight into Module 1, Structuring the Board, the Foundation of Governance.
Okay, our very first essential English terms to lock in are the two main models of board structure. We've got the unitary board versus the tiered board. Now, over in the UK and the US, the standard is the unitary board. And a good trick here, unitary literally means unified. You have executive and non-executive directors sitting together around one single table, making decisions as a unified group with equal legal responsibility. Now, on the flip side, we have the tiered board, which you'll see a lot in places like Germany, and just like it sounds, the structure is separated into tiers. Usually there's a management board running the everyday business, and then a totally separate supervisory board overseeing them. So for your exam, just remember, unitary equals together, tiered equals separated.
So, zooming in on that board, who is actually sitting at the table? First up, we have the executive director. These folks are the ultimate insiders. By definition, an executive director is a senior employee of the company. Think the CEO, or, well, you, the future chief financial officer. They have this dual role, right? They manage the big business areas day to day, but as board members, they also share responsibility for the entire organization's strategic leadership. They are the ones actually driving the operational machine.
And then, in total contrast, we have the non-executive director. Now, in the English business world, absolutely everyone just calls them a NED. NEDs are the outsiders. They are not employees, and they definitely do not manage the day-to-day operations. So, why are they even there? Well, the entire cornerstone of this role comes down to one absolutely vital vocabulary word: independence. Their job is to be a balancing influence. Because they aren't caught up in daily office politics or operational biases, they can step back and look at the company's strategy and risks completely objectively.
And what happens when you get that board composition terribly, terribly wrong? Let's talk about the infamous medical startup Theranos. They were pushing this supposedly revolutionary blood testing technology, right? But look at this quote. The board members had little to no actual industry expertise. Instead of medical experts, they brought in politicians and former military generals. It seems their key function was basically just assisting Theranos to win government contracts. Because these external board members completely lacked the relevant technical English vocabulary and expertise, they had no idea that technology was essentially a massive fraud. The big takeaway for your exam here: your board members must have the specific skills that actually match the complexity of your company.
Moving right along to Module 2, the power of NEDs, challenge and scrutiny. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly does a NED do all day? Well, the Corporate Governance Code really leans on 4 key English terms you need to memorize: strategy, performance, risk, and people. First, they contribute to strategy by constructively challenging the executives. Second, they monitor performance. And the absolute key vocabulary word you want to use here is scrutiny. They rigorously scrutinize management to make sure goals are actually being met. Third, they oversee risk by verifying financial information. And finally, people, which means they help determine executive pay and handle succession planning. Basically, a NED's ultimate superpower is their willingness to intelligently challenge management.
To really cement this concept, let's look at a nightmare scenario: the collapse of British Home Stores, or BHS, in 2016. A parliamentary report actually cited a prevailing culture in which a dominant personality at the top was able to get his way with little, if any, internal challenge. This is exactly what we want to avoid. When a board just becomes a personal empire for a CEO and the NEDs completely fail to provide that internal challenge, disaster strikes. Money flows out, huge pension deficits build up, and the company eventually goes under. So for the exam, highlight this phrase in your mind, constructive challenge. Without it, you have a fundamental governance failure.
Okay, on to Module 3, Crucial Board Committees, Delegating the Details. Consider this slide your ultimate cheat sheet. You need to know these 4 committees cold. First, the Audit Committee. They ensure the integrity of financial reporting, and they must be made up of independent NEDs so management can't hide any financial truths. Second, the Risk Committee. They define risk and mitigation, but notice their composition. It's a mix of executives and NEDs. Why? Because you actually need the executive's operational knowledge combined with the NED's objective oversight. Third is the Nominations Committee. They handle board appointments and succession, keeping the selection independent and away from any old boys network. And fourth, the Remunerations Committee. They set executive pay. Crucially, this must be composed of wholly independent NEDs for the obvious reason that you can't have executives setting their own salaries.
And why is that independence so incredibly vital? Well, look at Enron, one of the biggest corporate frauds in history. An actual Enron Audit Committee member later admitted that the committee was essentially a rubber stamp. The members lacked relevant financial expertise, they had serious conflicts of interest, and literally just turned up to have a good lunch and collect their paychecks. Employees didn't even have direct access to them to blow the whistle. This right here is exactly why modern governance codes strictly mandate that audit committees must be highly qualified, independent, and actively engaged.
Let's zoom in on the Risk Committee for a second. Their duties usually follow a really clear 3-step sequence. Step 1, agree on a risk management strategy. Step 2, and pay attention because this introduces a massive piece of boardroom English vocabulary. Define the organization's risk appetite. Risk appetite simply means the level and nature of risk the board is actually willing to accept to achieve its goals. Then, Step 3, continuously monitor the overall risk exposure to make sure the company is staying within that defined appetite.
All right, final stretch. Module 4, Rules of Remuneration, Rewarding Directors Right.
So, the big question. How do we pay executives enough to keep them without structuring it in a way that encourages them to, destroy the company for a quick bonus? To grasp this, you need to firmly distinguish between 2 key English concepts, basic salary and performance-related pay. Basic salary is your fixed pay. It's simply what you get for doing what's expected in your contract. Best practice says this shouldn't actually be the bulk of your payout. The real money should come from performance-related pay, which are variable bonuses linked to specific targets. But here is the danger. If those targets are poorly designed, an executive might manipulate the results. They might cut necessary long-term quality assurance costs just to hit a short-term profit target and trigger that massive variable bonus. To stop that kind of manipulation, we rely on the principles from the ICGN, the International Corporate Governance Network. Their rules are super clear. First, alignment. Pay has to align management's interests with the investor's interests. Second, a long-term focus. Timescales must be about long-term value creation, not just a quick quarterly bump. Third, and this is a great English industry term to use, clawback provisions. This means if an executive commits serious misconduct or misstates the financials, the company has the legal right to claw back or literally take back the bonus money that was already paid out. And finally, transparent disclosure, making sure everyone knows exactly how that pay is calculated.
And trust me, investors are absolutely reading those disclosures. Take a look at this headline from W.S. Smith during the pandemic. The company tried to give a pay rise to its CEO while the wider economy was really suffering. Investors expressed their anger and 33% actually voted against the remuneration report. In business English, this is known as say-on pay. It's the shareholders' right to vote on executive compensation. When a company misreads the room and puts executive pay ahead of shareholder returns, those institutional investors will absolutely revolt.
So the safest way to ensure that long-term alignment is through share-based incentives, but they have to follow best practices. Here is your essential vocabulary for this. First, you need a minimum 3-year vesting period. Vesting means the executive doesn't actually own the shares until a certain period of time has passed. It makes sure they stick around to build sustainable value. Second, use phased grants instead of lump sums, so they get the shares gradually over time. And third, post-vesting holding requirements. This means even after they officially own the shares, they're required to hold on to them for an additional period before selling. This guarantees what we call absolute goal congruence with the shareholders.
Wow.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, from unitary boards and Ned scrutiny all the way to risk appetites and clawback provisions. Hopefully, you are feeling a lot more confident with this English governance terminology. So, I want to leave you with one final provocative exam question to ponder as you finish off that coffee. If you were appointed CFO today, how would you personally balance the intense, daily drive for profit with the absolute necessity of independent oversight? How do you make sure your own ambition doesn't override the governance structures designed to protect the company? Think on that. Good luck on your exams. You're going to do great. Keep studying.